Sorry, sir. Humming what? We don't have that in the system. The young cashier's voice came out flat, mechanical, filtered through her off-white wireless earbuds. Not a furrowed brow, not the slightest hint of apology. Just a hollow statement, as if she'd said, "It's raining today." Jules Hayes stood frozen in front of the gleaming marble pastry counter, the very place where his grandmother, Elena Hayes, used to set down a steaming hummingbird cake on every special occasion. Today marked the 5th anniversary of her passing. He had put on an old white shirt, knotted the sea blue silk tie she once gave him, just to honor the ritual. Come to the shop, order her cake, sit at the familiar table, and remember, Elena's pastry had never been just a bakery. Nestled on the cobblestone corner of the West Village, where 2 rows of old elms arched their branches into a leafy vault, it was once the heart of the neighborhood. Elena, an Italian immigrant with just enough English to name ingredients, had opened it with the savings she kept hidden under her bed. From nothing but her own 2 hands, she turned it into an oasis in the middle of Manhattan. Glass windows misted with oven warmth, the cheerful ding of the door chime, the scent of butter, cinnamon, and vanilla wrapping itself around anyone who stepped inside. People didn't just come here for cake. They came for the warmth of a home in the middle of the city. Jules spoke softly, more to himself than to the girl. "That is the name of this bakery." A hand landed on his shoulder, light but heavy with warning. Marcus Thorne, ash-gray suit, neatly combed hair, a smile as smooth as melting butter, emerged from behind the counter. "Jules, my friend, don't give the new staff a hard time," he said, voice sweet as syrup but cold at its core. "You know we had to optimize the menu to keep up with trends. Why not try the vanilla cloud? It's our top seller this week." Optimize. The word slid from his mouth like glossy icing over the coffin of a memory. Jules nodded. He wasn't sure he could say anything else. He took a seat at the oak table by the window, the one where Elena once sat with her cappuccino and recipe notebook. Back then, midday light would pour in, the smell of melting butter blending with the soft clink of a stirring spoon. Now, the cold blue-white of LED strips made the tabletop feel like a tombstone. The vanilla cloud arrived. Picture perfect for Instagram. Flawless white frosting, edges cut with machine precision. He sliced into it, lifted a bite to his tongue. Chemical sweetness caught at the back of his throat, the crumb dry and tight, with no trace of fresh pineapple, ripe banana, or butter-toasted walnuts. The flavors that had once drawn customers from every corner of West Village. This was only a beautiful corpse of a cake. He looked around. None of the familiar faces remained. Not Mr. and Mrs. Gable with their Earl Grey, nor the young artist sketching the street corner in her notebook. Now there were only clusters of tourists, posing with cakes and phones held high. The gentle jazz, once mingling with the scent of fresh bakes, had been replaced by a soulless pop playlist, electronic bass thudding against the glass. On the wall, Elena's portrait still hung, but slightly askew, with a thin layer of dust along the frame. Her eyes in the photo seemed to meet his, silently asking, "What have you done to this place?" Jules swallowed the bitterness. He had once been a top M&A lawyer on Wall Street, wearing bespoke suits, negotiating $100 million deals. He'd given it all up when Elena passed, to take over Elena's pastry, the legacy she had built from nothing. Back then, Marcus, his college friend, was the one he trusted to run daily operations. Another friend, David Chun, became CFO. They had promised to preserve the soul of the bakery, while he guided the vision and safeguarded the heritage. But standing here, surrounded by artificial caramel scent and shallow laughter, Jules knew he had handed the keys to the wrong people. He rose, carrying the half-eaten slice, and walked toward the hallway leading to the office. The narrow, carpeted passage was dimly lit with a sickly yellow glow. The office door was ajar. David's voice drifted out, deep and cool without inflection. Ingredient costs down by 35%, retail prices up by 15%. The profit margin is perfect. Marcus answered, his tone light but tinged with triumph. Perfect. A few more months, and the board, which we've lined up, will see that Jules's vision isn't working anymore. He'll have to sell. A pause. Then Marcus drove the blade in deeper. He's still living in the past with that old lady's recipes. Sentiment doesn't pay West Village rent. Jules froze. The vanilla cloud in his hand suddenly felt as heavy as stone. This wasn't mismanagement. It was deliberate. Not a mistake, a slow execution. And he was the target. He stepped back, his movements silent, as though afraid to wake the sleeping predator. Outside, the espresso machine hissed, and the smell of artificial pastries hung in the air. But in this hallway, where the light dimmed and faded, Jules knew. This gilded cage was no longer a home. It was a trap, and the two old friends were the gatekeepers, waiting for the moment to slam it shut and swallow his inheritance whole. That night, Jules didn't sleep. Manhattan outside his window still glowed like daylight, but in his mind stretched a deep, unbroken darkness. Marcus's words circled in his head like a needle scratching glass. Sentiment doesn't pay West Village rent. He sat at the desk in his 12th floor apartment, staring at Elena's recipe book, which he had kept like a talisman. Every shaky line of her handwriting, every coffee-colored stain, every folded corner seemed to look right back at him, demanding an answer. The M&A lawyer inside Jules, the one he thought had been buried under flour and the scent of baked goods, suddenly resurfaced. His anger didn't explode into sound. It crystallized into something cold and sharp. Focus. He opened his laptop. He was no longer the bakery owner. He was a ghost preparing to hunt. The next day, Jules walked into Elena's in a charcoal hoodie, cap brim pulled low, dark, rimmed glasses hiding his eyes. He ordered an espresso and chose a table tucked deep in the corner. Like a passing customer working on a manuscript, he pulled out a notebook, but instead of prose, the page filled with symbols, arrows, and clipped notes. From the shadows, he watched. Sophia Rossi, the aging head baker, moved through the kitchen like a ghost herself. Hands that had once kneaded dough with the strength and precision of a master now trembled slightly as she boxed industrial pastries. Each time she opened the oven, her eyes dimmed, as if forced to look at a counterfeit child she had been made to birth. Leo Martinez, the young man Jules had once mentored, stood behind the counter, eyes fixed on the POS screen. He repeated the same lifeless greetings, voice flat, avoiding eye contact. The curious apprentice who once asked about sourdough starters and oven temperatures was now just a tired shell. Jules waited until after closing. When Leo stepped out the back door, keys in his pocket, Jules called softly, "Leo." The young man froze. Surprise and a flicker of fear crossed his face. "What are you doing here?" "Taking a walk. Wanted to talk," Jules said evenly. "No orders. No acquiescence. I was wrong to leave this place. I let them let you down." Leo said nothing. A cold wind funneled through the alley, carrying the stale smell of fry oil from the restaurant next door. Finally, he exhaled, like releasing something held too long. In a low, halting voice, he told Jules about Marcus and David pocketing the tips, about threats to fire anyone who complained about quality, and their constant refrain. Jules approved everything. That night, Jules called Isabel "Izzy" Vance, an old college friend, now working as a forensic accountant. They met in a quiet bar, golden light pooling over the wooden counter. Jules slid a thin folder toward her. Invoices, supply contracts, and a few notes he had managed to slip from the office. "Izzy, I think I'm being robbed." She opened the folder, eyes scanning fast. Fake invoices. Phantom suppliers. Premium ingredient contracts with no deliveries, she said, looking up, her gaze sharp as a blade. "They're not just cutting costs. They're embezzling." The next day, Jules went to Sophia. She was in the storage room, stacking boxes of flour on the shelf. He said nothing, just handed her a croissant he'd bought from the front counter, dry, without a hint of butter. Sophia looked at the pastry, then at him. Tears slipped down the creases of her face. "They made me throw out Elena's sourdough starter. Said it was unstable, too-time consuming." She opened an old, locked cabinet. Inside, wrapped in white linen, was Elena's handwritten recipe book. "I kept it. I was waiting for you. Jules took the book, feeling as if he were holding his grandmother's hand through time. It wasn't just recipes. It was a vow. Late that night, Izzy called. Jules, this runs deeper than you think. They're deliberately tanking the brand's value. The buyer is an offshore company. I'd bet it's theirs. Jules said nothing. In his mind, Elena's appeared like a body being drained of blood. And Marcus, David, the men he once called friends, were the ones holding the tube. Jules closed his laptop and looked out over the city. Every lit window in the West Village seemed like a square on a giant chessboard. He knew he had to play this match the way he had back on Wall Street. Quietly, ruthlessly, and with absolute precision. He slid the recipe book into his desk drawer. His reflection in the glass stared back, cold and clear. They think I've forgotten how to play. Now they'll remember. Jules opened his apartment door to the lingering scent of last night's coffee. Izzy was already there, seated in a chair with her laptop open, streams of code and charts flickering on the screen. On the table, Sophia had placed a brown paper bag. Inside were scraps of half-eaten pastries, not meant to be eaten, but to serve as evidence of what they were fighting against. Hollow quality, a soul drained dry. Leo leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression a mixture of faint embarrassment and quiet resolve. The small apartment had turned into a command center. The opposite wall was plastered with sticky notes, cash flow diagrams, and printed photos of Marcus and David pulled from public online sources. Red lines connected shell companies, phantom suppliers, and offshore accounts. Izzy spoke quickly, like she was arguing a case in court, pointing at each nexus. We need this recorded, not just documents. We need them to say it themselves, to brag about it. Leo sat down, placing his phone on the table. They love to brag. All it takes is someone rich enough, arrogant enough, for them to think he's an ally. Jules's mouth curled slightly as an idea lit in his mind. He called an old acquaintance of Izzy's, a veteran stage actor with a deep voice and the bearing of a man born in million-dollar boardrooms. 3 days later, Mr. Harrison of Sterling Investments walked in. Charcoal suit, Patek watch, eyes cold and tailor, cut for the role of a financial predator. The meeting took place in the back office behind the pastry counter, now the hollow throne room of Marcus and David. Jules, Izzy, and Leo watched from Jules's apartment via his laptop screen. The audio feed was so clear they could hear the pour of Macallan into crystal glasses. Mr. Harrison didn't smile. Your bakery has a brand, but it's dying. Too much heritage, too little profit. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if pricked. We've stripped out all the costly sentimental stuff. French butter? Replaced with premium margarine. Valrhona chocolate? A compound blend that's 70% cheaper. Customers never notice. David cut in, voice low but distinct, and we built a narrative of natural decline. Inflation, changing tastes. Jules Hayes bought it completely. Soon, he'll sell it back to us for pennies through the shell company. Mr. Harrison leaned back. And he suspects nothing. Marcus laughed. A sharp glass-cutting sound. Suspect? Jules is an artist, not a businessman. He thinks a whiff of cinnamon and a touching story can save the whole shop. He's a living antique, and I'll be the one to put him behind museum glass. In the apartment, Jules stared at the screen. Each sentence landed like another stone blocking the exit. But instead of pain, he felt a cold, steady calm. They had just signed their own sentence. The meeting ended with a handshake and a promise to send a formal offer. When the door closed, Marcus and David uncorked a bottle to celebrate. To the future, Marcus toasted with a smirk. No, Elena. No, Jules. Just us. Jules shut the laptop, the light vanishing in an instant. In the dark, he exhaled, long and slow. The chess game was nearly over, and now every piece was his to move. The next 3 days were the silence before a storm. Izzy organized the entire body of evidence. Audio recordings, photos, forged contracts, offshore money trails. Sophia dug up old invoices and Elena's kitchen logs to prove the changes in ingredient quality. Leo gathered testimonies from former staff, those fired for daring to ask questions. Jules spent the final night alone in the darkened kitchen. He set Elena's recipe book on the marble counter, opening to the page for Hummingbird Cake. The scent of cinnamon and banana seemed to rise in his memory, mingling with the echo of her laughter. He wasn't just fighting to reclaim a bakery. He was fighting to return a piece of himself. As dawn broke, he looked out over the West Village. Sunlight fell across the cobblestone streets, the shop windows reflecting a sky of clear blue. Today, the gilded cage would be unlocked, and the ones who thought themselves masters would discover they were just birds trapped in their own design. The handwritten invitations went out in silence. Heavy paper, black ink, neat strokes. An evening honoring the legacy of Elena's. Sunday, 6 p.m. No further explanation. The recipients were the former staff who had been cast aside, the loyal customers who had drifted away, the landlord, and even the New York Times food critic who had once put Elena's on the front page of the dining section. Sunday arrived with that peculiar winter light in New York. The sun hanging low, spilling gold down cobblestone streets, reflecting off the bakery's glass windows. On the sidewalk, a few guests gathered, speaking in low voices. They peered inside, glimpsing figures moving about, the faint clink of cutlery carrying through the glass. Inside, the atmosphere was nothing like an ordinary day. The lights were soft and warm, casting a golden glow over the red, brick walls and wooden frames. Tables had been pushed back to create an open space in the center. Sophia had been up since 4 a.m., working with several former employees to recreate Elena's recipes. Buttery French croissants, lemon tarts, and at the center of the counter, the hummingbird cake that many hadn't seen in years. The air was thick with the scent of ripe pineapple, banana, cinnamon, and vanilla, stirring memories of time long gone. Marcus and David arrived in fresh suits, their smiles professionally measured. They expected a dull farewell gathering, but as they stepped through the door, they faltered. No laughter, no pop music. The crowd sat in neat rows, all eyes fixed on a small stage at the back of the room. No one spoke, but the silence was heavy, the kind that comes before a storm. Jules stepped out from the kitchen. No suit, no tie, just a worn white apron with Elena stitched in red thread across the chest. There was still a dusting of flour on his hands, but his voice was clear and steady. Thank you all for coming. Marcus and David are right about one thing. Cinnamon doesn't pay the rent. But lies can't build a legacy either. Marcus forced a smile, raising his glass. Jules, come on, Jules lifted a hand. The lights dimmed. A large screen behind the bar flickered on. The speakers carried crystal, clear audio. Marcus's confident, contemptuous voice from his meeting with Mr. Harrison. Jules is a dreamer, not a businessman. He's a living antique, and I'll be the one to put him behind museum glass. Then David's voice followed, steady and deliberate. He'll sell it back to us for pennies through the shell company. The image shifted to the two of them toasting, to the future. No Elena, no Jules, just us. The room went utterly still. Sophia raised a hand to her mouth, tears spilling, but her eyes bright. Leo stood straighter, his shoulders lifting as if shedding a weight he'd carried for 2 years. Mrs. Gable, the elderly customer once been driven away by new staff, stared directly at Marcus. There was no anger in her gaze now, only pity for a man who had sold his own soul. Some of the newer employees exchanged uneasy looks, clearly hearing the truth for the first time. The landlord folded his arms, eyes narrowing. The food critic slowly set down her glass, her gaze moving from the screen to Marcus, as if memorizing every line of the face that had just blackened his own name. Marcus cleared his throat, stepping forward. Fabricated. This recording is illegal. From the crowd, Izzy rose, holding a thick folder. All evidence was collected legally, with the consent of the property's rightful owner. That would be Jules Hayes. And as of this morning, it's been submitted to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. This is a full audit of your fraudulent activity and embezzlement. David took a step back, his face draining of color. Marcus glanced around for a supportive look, but found only cold stares or averted eyes. No one stood with them. The door opened. 2 plainclothes investigators entered, their voices firm. Marcus Thorne? David Shun? You'll be coming with us. Marcus gave a brittle laugh, as if clinging to some shred of dignity. But the dry snap of metal cuffs shattered that illusion. David said nothing, his gaze fixed on the floor, shoulders sagging as if something inside him had broken. As they were led out, passing the faces they had once dismissed, no one spoke, no one looked away. Jules simply watched them go, his eyes heavy with something far weightier than accusation. He hadn't defeated an enemy. He had buried two friends. The door shut with a hard, final thud, the sound of a chapter closing. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the breaths being taken. Then Sophia, in the front row, began to clap. Softly at first, steady as a heartbeat. Leo joined her, then one person, then another, and soon the entire room was on its feet. The applause swelled, echoing off the brick walls and up into the wooden ceiling. Not for Jules, but for the truth. For Elena's. At dawn the next morning, West Village was still damp with mist, the first sunlight sliding over bare elm branches and reflecting in the windows of Elena's pastry. A neat sign read, "Temporarily closed for renovation," but inside, the lights were bright and the air was alive. No more pop music, no more artificial caramel scent. Only the real sounds of knives against cutting boards, spoons stirring in metal pitchers, and the honest fragrance of French butter melting. Jules stood in the center of the kitchen, sleeves rolled high, trousers dusted white with flour. Mopping the floor, as if scrubbing away every stain was part of a ritual to erase the past. On the marble counter, Sophia and two former staff kneaded dough, their hands slow but steady, each movement carrying decades of memory. In the corner, Leo opened a brand new notebook, jotting down each step Sophia explained, his eyes bright like a child seeing the real world for the first time. Jules placed Elena's recipe book in front of Sophia, the leather cover cleaned, the corners smoothed. "It belongs here," he said warmly. "And this place belongs to you, Sophia. You'll be the executive head chef." She paused, eyes glistening. "Are you sure?" "More sure than anything." He turned to Leo. "You'll be her apprentice manager. I'll cover your culinary school tuition." Leo's mouth fell open. I don't know what to say, just say yes," Jules replied with a smile that for the first time in months was cloud-free. They began with small steps, tossing cheap flour and margarine, rearranging the ingredient shelves, the crumple of paper bags hitting the trash, sounding like a drumbeat marking an ending. The scent of grated lemon zest, real vanilla, and naturally risen dough filled the air, pushing out the memory of chemical haze. On the wall, Elena's portrait still hung askew from the day before. Jules carefully took it down, cleaned the glass, polished the frame, and re-hung it in the center. Her smiling eyes now looked over a bright, living kitchen, as if pleased by what she saw. The room paused for a moment to take it in. Jules stepped back, arms folded, nodding slightly. The promise had been kept. That day, there were no customers, but to them, it was a grand reopening. Sophia guided Leo's hands through kneading sourdough, humming an old Italian tune Elena used to sing. Izzy stopped by with coffee and envelopes, the termination of every clause Marcus and David had signed, and certification that the brand name Elena's would remain untouched. "It's all clean now," she said with a wink. By late afternoon, sunlight slanted low as Jules opened the front door. A light breeze carried the scent of coffee from across the street. Neighbors paused to peer in and smile. He raised a hand in greeting. There was no ribbon, cutting, no banner, just the clear, gentle ding of the door chime as someone stepped inside. Jules turned to Sophia and Leo, and they smiled together. In the mind's camera, the frame lingered on Sophia's hands, shaping golden dough beside Leo's clumsy but determined movements, the light catching flour dust like specks of gold. Slowly, the image pulled back, a kitchen filled with soft laughter, the sound of knives and spoons, the smell of fresh bread, and Elena's portrait watching over it all, eyes bright, lips curved as if singing along. Black screen, silence, then one sound, the ding of the door chime, light and clear, like the greeting of a new day. Sometimes a legacy isn't about what you leave behind, but how you protect it from those who would erase it. Jules had learned that preserving a recipe, a flavor, meant preserving a piece of memory, love, and pride. This story reminds us, money can buy a reputation, but never integrity. And when the truth comes to light, it will always speak louder than any lie. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up to protect what they believe in? Share that story in the comments. If this one touched you, like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next tale, where kindness and integrity always find their way home.